The glass doors of the downtown bank slid open with a soft hiss, the afternoon sun spilling across the polished marble floor. People dressed in fine suits and elegant dresses stood in line, whispering about business, property, and weekend plans, their voices carrying the confidence of wealth and stability. Then, slowly, the atmosphere shifted. An old black man stepped inside, his steps heavy, his shoes worn thin from miles of walking, his coat patched in many places, faded by years of hardship. On his shoulder hung a rough canvas sack, frayed at the edges, dragging down on his tired frame. Heads turned immediately. A few gasps slipped from the crowd. A young banker at the counter smirked and nudged his colleague, whispering that the man must be lost. A woman in pearls clutched her purse tighter, her eyes filled with suspicion. Laughter began to bubble among the waiting customers, soft at first, then bolder. The old man didn't flinch. His eyes, deep, dark, unshaken, scanned the room as if he had been here before, as if he knew every stone, every wall, every piece of glass. He walked slowly but firmly to the center of the lobby, each step echoing against the marble like a challenge. The security guard, tall and broad-shouldered, moved closer, one hand resting on his belt, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Sir," he said sharply, "you don't belong here. This is not a shelter." The crowd chuckled louder, emboldened by the guard's words. The old man raised his head, his voice steady, carrying through the wide hall. "This bank is mine." For a second, silence hung heavy, then laughter erupted like thunder. People shook their heads, some pointed, others sneered. To them, the ragged old man with a sack was nothing but a joke, but he did not move. He did not retreat. Instead, he carefully set his canvas sack down on the marble floor, the sound of its weight startlingly loud. His laughter slowed, curious eyes fixed on the mysterious bag. The manager, a polished man in his 40s with slick blonde hair and an expensive watch, stepped out from behind the counter, his smile tight, his tone dripping with superiority. "Sir, you are mistaken. This institution has belonged to the same family for generations. Now please leave before we are forced to remove you." The old man's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not bitter, not mocking, but certain. "I am not mistaken," he said quietly. "This place was taken from me, long ago, and today I have come to claim it back." The mocking voices died down, replaced by uneasy murmurs. The security guard's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around his radio, ready to call for backup. Yet something in the old man's calmness made even him hesitate. Slowly, with deliberate movements, the old man bent to open the sack, the fabric rough and stiff, his fingers trembling not from fear but from age. The crowd leaned forward, breath caught in their throats. The guard barked, "Stop right there." But his voice cracked slightly. The customers exchanged nervous glances. The laughter that once filled the lobby now replaced with a tense silence. The old man looked up, his gaze firm, his voice like a promise. "Inside this bag lies the truth of who I am, and why this bank will never belong to you." The lobby froze, every eye on him, every heartbeat waiting for what would come next. The lobby remained still, every eye locked on the old man and the sack at his feet. Moments earlier, the air had been filled with laughter, but now there was only silence. The weight of his words seemed heavier than the sack itself. The security guard shifted uneasily, his hand brushing against the holster at his side. "I said stop," he warned. But even his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. There was something about the calmness of this man, something that made even the most arrogant pause. The old man straightened slowly, his fingers still resting on the sack. His eyes swept across the room, lingering on the mocking faces that had just moments ago laughed at him. "You think I am nothing," he said softly. "But I carry here a truth older than your laughter, a truth that has been denied for decades." A woman near the door whispered, "What could he possibly have in there?" Her voice trembling, not from fear but from curiosity that gnawed at everyone present. The bank manager stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation, his polished shoes clicking against the floor, his jaw tight with irritation. "Sir, this is your final warning. Leave now or I will have security escort you out." His voice was sharp, but it did not carry the same confidence as before. The old man looked straight at him, his gaze steady. "You wear that suit and stand behind this counter as if this place is yours. But do you even know whose sweat built it? Whose blood kept it standing? Whose hands shaped the very foundation beneath your feet?" The words struck deep, Not only because of what was said, but because of the certainty with which he said them. The crowd exchanged uneasy glances, some scoffed, but others felt a stirring discomfort they could not explain. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, the old man bent down and pulled open the sack. The sound of the worn fabric tearing against itself echoed through the quiet hall. All eyes widened. Inside were not rags nor scraps, but stacks of old papers, bound together with faded leather straps, their edges yellowed with time. On top lay a thick envelope stamped with official seals. Nearly faded away, the manager frowned. "What is this?" he muttered, leaning slightly closer, unable to hide his curiosity. The old man lifted the envelope with trembling hands, holding it as though it were a sacred relic. "These," he declared, "are the deeds, contracts, and letters your family hoped the world would forget." Gasps rippled across the lobby. Customers leaned forward, their disbelief colliding with the authority in his voice. The security guard frowned, his hand still near his weapon, but his eyes now uncertain. "Nonsense," the manager snapped, his tone sharp, though his face betrayed unease. "Documents that old cannot mean anything today. You're wasting everyone's time." But the old man only smiled faintly, a tired, weathered smile. "Time does not erase truth. It only buries it, waiting for the right moment to rise again." He spread the papers on a nearby table, the faded ink still legible, signatures visible, names familiar to anyone who knew the town's history. "My father," he said, his voice thick with memory, "once owned this land, every brick, every stone of it. He was cheated, betrayed by men who looked like you, who thought men like me had no right to property, no right to dignity, no right to stand equal." The lobby fell silent. Some customers shifted uncomfortably, no longer amused but disturbed. The old man's words carried a weight that no one could ignore. The manager's eyes narrowed, his arrogance fighting with the fear growing in his chest. "Even if what you say were true, those papers cannot change who owns this bank today." The old man met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe not in your world, but truth has a way of breaking through lies, and when it does, no suit, no guard, no arrogance can hold it back." Suddenly, the heavy doors of the bank swung open once more, the cold air rushing in. Everyone turned, their eyes widening further. A younger man in a dark tailored suit walked in, his steps confident, his expression serious. He carried a black leather case and wore the badge of a federal legal officer. The murmurs grew louder, the crowd shifting uneasily. The old man's gaze softened as he looked at the newcomer. "I told you," he said quietly. "Truth does not stay buried forever." The customers stared. The security guard froze. And the manager paled, for the storm that was about to unfold was greater than anything they had expected. The bank grew quiet again, all eyes turning toward the man who had just stepped inside. He was tall, well-dressed, his black suit neat and pressed, and on his chest glimmered a small official badge. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The old black man straightened, his tired eyes softening, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "You came," he whispered, his voice carrying a quiet strength. The officer walked calmly into the lobby, his leather case tucked under his arm, his expression unreadable. The customer stepped aside, giving him space. The security guard stiffened, unsure whether to act or to wait. "What is this disturbance?" the officer asked firmly, his voice steady, his eyes moving from the nervous bank manager to the weary old man standing by the sack of documents. The manager quickly stepped forward, desperate to control the situation. "Sir, this is nothing but an old man making wild claims. He says he owns the bank. It is absurd. We were just about to escort him out." The officer raised a hand, cutting him off, his gaze sharp. "I will decide what is absurd," he said calmly. Then he turned to the old man. "Mr. Kirby, you may proceed." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, the customers whispering to one another, the bank staff glancing at each other in confusion. The officer had called him by name. He knew him, the old man, Elijah Kirby, nodded slowly, his hand resting on the stack of papers. "For years they called me a fool, a dreamer, a beggar, but you know the truth. These documents tell the story of my family, of the land taken, of the wealth stolen, and of the rights denied." The officer placed his case on the table and opened it, revealing fresh documents stamped with modern seals. He pulled out one paper and laid it beside two. Old yellow deeds, I have reviewed everything, signatures, dates, witnesses, every record that was hidden away, and I confirm these papers are valid. Mr. Kirby's claim is not only real, it is legal. Gasps filled the lobby. The customers stared wide-eyed. The laughter that once mocked the old man now seemed cruel. The manager's face turned red, his voice breaking. This cannot be true. This bank has been under my family's control for generations. There must be some mistake. But the officer shook his head firmly. There is no mistake. The records were deliberately hidden. The transfers were made with fraud. Everything was designed to strip Mr. Kirby's family of their rights. But the law does not forget, no matter how many years pass. The security guard stepped back, his confidence gone, the arrogance in his eyes replaced with unease. Some customers lowered their heads, ashamed of the way they had laughed only moments ago. Elijah's voice broke the silence, steady yet filled with emotion. I came here not to beg, not to fight, but to remind you that dignity does not fade with age, nor does truth crumble with time. You mocked me because of my coat, my skin, my years, but now you see me for who I truly am. The officer nodded. From this day forward, the ownership of this property will be placed under review, pending the transfer back to Mr. Kirby's name, he said clearly, his words echoing across the lobby like thunder. The manager shook his head, stumbling back a step, his pride collapsing. No, this is impossible, he muttered, but the room no longer listened to him. Instead, all eyes turned toward the old man, the one they had mocked, the one they had dismissed. Standing tall in the center of the hall, his sack of documents now shining brighter than gold, somewhere in the back, a young teller whispered, "We laughed at him, but he was right all along." The words spread like a ripple, guilt sinking into every face. Elijah closed his sack slowly, his movements calm, his eyes filled with quiet victory. "The world will always try to bury men like me," he said softly, "but remember this, truth always rises, no matter how deep you hide it." The officer placed a firm hand on Elijah's shoulder, guiding him gently toward the exit. But as they walked, the customers parted silently, their heads bowed, respect replacing mockery. For the first time in decades, the old man carried not only his sack, but also the weight of justice finally delivered. The silence in the lobby was heavy. Everyone could feel the shift. Moments ago, the old man had been nothing but a target for laughter. Now he stood like a mountain, his sack of papers more powerful than gold. But the manager was not ready to give up. His pride burned too strong. His voice cracked as he stepped forward. "No, this is wrong. I will not allow this," he snapped, his fists clenching at his sides. "This man is a liar, an actor. This must be some trick." The officer fixed him with a sharp gaze, his calm voice cutting through the air. "Careful with your words, Mr. Temp. The law is not a stage for your arrogance. The evidence is solid. I reviewed it myself," the crowd whispered, some nodding in agreement, others still shocked that such a truth had been hidden for so long. But the manager's face twisted with anger. He pointed at Elijah, his tone rising. "Look at him dressed in rags, carrying an old bag. You really believe this man has the right to stand here and claim ownership of a bank?" A hush fell again, the cruelty in his words echoing across the hall. Elijah lifted his eyes, steady and calm. "Yes," he answered simply, "because dignity does not live in suits, and wealth is not measured by the shine of your shoes." The customers shifted uneasily. Many felt the sting of shame, remembering how quickly they had judged him by appearance. The officer spoke again, firmer now. "Mr. Temp, your family benefited from fraud. The evidence proves it. Denying it will not erase the truth. Instead of resisting, you should prepare for the consequences." The manager's arrogance wavered, his face pale, but his voice still tried to hold power. "I will call my lawyers. I will fight this in every court. You cannot take this bank from me." Elijah stepped closer, his back straight despite his years, his voice deep and calm. "You never owned it. You only held it in chains, stolen from hands that worked and bled for it. Today those chains break." The crowd gasped softly, his words like fire against the cold arrogance in the room. The security guard, once ready to drag Elijah out, now stood frozen, his eyes lowered, guilt heavy on his face. The officer noticed and spoke firmly. "Stand down. Your role is to protect, not to silence truth." The guard stepped back slowly, his head bowed. He could not meet Elijah's eyes. The manager's rage cracked further. He slammed his hand on the counter. "You don't understand. This bank is everything my family built. It carries our name, our pride. Elijah looked at him with quiet sorrow. You built nothing. You only carried what you took. You built your pride on the ashes of others, and now the ashes rise to speak. The word struck the manager hard. He faltered, but pride would not let him fall completely. His voice shook. This is not over, he whispered, his eyes burning with both fear and defiance. The officer closed his case, his tone final. No, it is over. From this day forward, the court will decide. Not your arrogance, not your name. The customers, who once laughed, now stood silent, their faces full of unease. Some even approached Elijah, their voices soft. We are sorry, one woman whispered, her pearl necklace trembling against her throat. We should not have judged you. Elijah nodded gently, his voice calm. Respect is not a gift you give. It is a duty you owe, not just to me, but to every person you once looked down upon. Tears welled in a few eyes, the shame of their laughter heavy on their hearts. The officer gestured toward the door, ready to lead Elijah out with dignity, but Elijah paused, turning back to the crowd, his gaze steady. Remember this moment, he said, because one day it will be you standing in rags, mocked and doubted, and you will pray someone sees beyond your coat. The lobby was silent, no laughter, no whispers, only the echo of his truth. And with that, he lifted his sack once more, his steps slow but strong, walking toward the doors not as a beggar, but as a man who had claimed his dignity back. Outside the bank, the news had already spread. Whispers traveled fast in the town, and by the time Elijah stepped out with the officer at his side, a small crowd had gathered, cameras flashing, reporters rushing forward with microphones. The customers who had mocked him minutes ago now stayed hidden behind the glass doors, ashamed to face the truth. But the people outside leaned in, curious, confused, eager to know why an old black man with a sack had brought the entire bank to silence. Elijah paused on the steps, his hand tightening on the strap of his worn bag. The officer stood beside him, raising a hand to calm the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced firmly, today is the beginning of a legal process. This man, Mr. Elijah Kirby, has presented evidence proving his rightful claim to the property on which this bank stands. For decades, that truth was buried. Today it has returned. Gasps moved through the people. Some nodded in respect. Others looked stunned. A reporter pushed forward, her voice sharp. Mr. Kirby, is it true you own this bank, that you were cheated out of it? Her microphone pointed directly at his trembling hands. Elijah lifted his head, his eyes calm but filled with history. My father owned the land. He built it with his hands, with sweat and blood. Men came and took it. They signed papers with lies. They told him a man like I had no place in business. And for 50 years that lie grew, but lies do not last forever. The crowd murmured, his words striking deep. Many bowed their heads. Some even wiped their eyes. Inside the bank, the manager watched from behind the glass, his pride boiling with anger. He spoke through clenched teeth. He will not win. I will not let this old fool destroy what my family built. But even his employees looked away, none of them willing to defend him now. The officer pulled out fresh documents, holding them high for the press to see. The case will move to federal court. These papers prove fraud. They prove theft. The law will decide, but make no mistake. The truth is on his side. The cameras flashed again, capturing Elijah's tired face, the patched coat, the sack that carried history heavier than gold. Then something unexpected happened. A young man stepped out from the crowd, his voice trembling. Mr. Kirby, he said, my grandfather used to tell stories about your family. He said they were cheated, but no one believed him. Today I see he was right. He bowed his head. I am sorry, sir. Elijah's eyes softened, his voice gentle. The apology is not mine to demand. It is yours to give to your children. Teach them never to laugh at a man for his skin or his clothes or his years. Teach them to respect before they regret. The words carried through the air like a sermon, leaving the crowd silent. The officer guided Elijah down the steps, but reporters shouted more questions. What will you do if the court rules in your favor? One asked loudly. Elijah stopped, his voice calm. I will not take revenge. I will build. I will create a place where every man, rich or poor, black or white, is treated with dignity, because respect is not a privilege, it is a right. The crowd erupted in applause. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded, seen. Ruck by the power of his words. Back inside, the manager's hands shook with rage. He slammed the desk with his fist. "He will never take this bank," he whispered. But his voice sounded weak even to himself, and for the first time in years, the name that had ruled the building felt smaller than the truth that had just stepped through its doors. Weeks later, the courthouse was filled, every seat taken. People stood in the aisles, waiting to hear the outcome of the case that had shaken their quiet town. Elijah Kirby sat in the front row, his old sack resting at his feet, his patched coat neatly brushed, his silver hair shining under the lights. Beside him sat the federal officer, calm and steady, the man who had carried his truth into the light. On the other side sat James Temp, the bank manager, his face pale, his lawyers whispering furiously in his ear, his arrogance still visible, but his eyes betrayed fear. The judge entered. The room rose. Then silence fell heavy. The case began. Documents were presented, testimonies heard, the faded papers from Elijah's sack placed carefully before the court, each one proving a history long buried. The manager's lawyers tried to argue. They called the papers worthless, too old. They claimed the land had changed hands fairly, but every word fell flat as the officer laid out the truth. "Fraud was committed," he said firmly, his voice echoing. "Records were altered, signatures forged, and ownership stolen. This court cannot ignore it." The judge leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents, his voice solemn. "These papers tell a story of theft, a theft hidden by wealth and power. But no lie lasts forever." The crowd murmured, heads turned toward Elijah, who sat quietly, his hands folded, his eyes filled not with anger, but with calm patience. James Temp rose suddenly, his voice shaking. "You cannot do this. My family built this town. We gave people jobs. We created wealth. You cannot hand everything to this old man." Elijah slowly stood, his back straight, his voice clear. "You booked. I'll nothing. You only held what you stole. My family's sweat built this land. Their sacrifice gave life to this town, and you turned it into your pride." The courtroom fell silent, his words striking deeper than any lawyer's argument. The judge raised his gavel, his voice firm. "This court recognizes the rightful claim of Elijah Kirby. The property on which the bank stands shall return to his name." The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. The room erupted. Some gasped, some clapped, others whispered in shock. James Temp sank back into his chair, his face drained, the arrogance gone, replaced by defeat. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek, not from revenge but from relief. A lifetime of waiting had finally ended. Outside, the press swarmed again, but this time the people were not mocking. They cheered, they clapped, some even called his name. "Mr. Kirby, Sir, Hero." Their voices rose like music. Elijah raised his hand gently, asking for quiet, his voice soft but strong. "Today is not just about me. It is about every man who was ever told he was less, every woman denied respect, every child mocked for being poor. Remember this. Truth may sleep, but it never dies." The crowd cheered louder, some with tears streaming down their faces. Even the young teller from the bank pushed through the crowd, his eyes wet. "Sir, I laughed at you. I mocked you. I was wrong. Please forgive me." Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness is not mine to give. It is yours to live. Be better than your laughter. Be kinder than your pride." The young man nodded, tears falling freely. The officer stood beside Elijah, his voice respectful. "The world saw you as a beggar, but today it sees you as an owner, a man of truth." Elijah smiled faintly, his eyes lifting to the sky. "I was never a beggar. I was always a man. It just too, like the world too long to see." The crowd roared again, their cheers rising like a wave. The old man with a sack had walked into the bank mocked and broken, but walked out a symbol of dignity, and from that day forward, no one in the town could forget the lesson carved into their hearts. Never judge a man by his coat, by his skin, or by his years, because the truth you laugh at today may be the truth that humbles you tomorrow. The old man walked slowly down the courthouse steps, his sack still heavy on his shoulder, but his heart light at last. Justice had spoken, dignity had returned, and the laughter that once cut him now bowed in silence.